Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Julia Daniel, and today I'm speaking to Albert Wright, who is a local business owner, and more importantly for our purposes today, he is involved on a regional level with the Federation of Small Businesses. And we're going to be talking to him about regeneration of the high street, how we can support our local businesses, and something about himself and how how his career so far, and how that feeds into to the position that he's in the FSB. So thank you for joining me, Albert.
Thank you for inviting me.
I wonder if you could start off by telling me something about yourself. So some of the highlights of your career,
Right.
quite a long career in business locally.
Yes, well, I've been around quite a long time now. I'm 70 this year, so it's quite a record. Normal life for somebody of my age. Lucky to go to a good grammar school and then on to university, get a good degree from Manchester University in history, politics and economics, and then go and have a career in Marks and Spencer PLC. So I joined as a graduate trainee and went through their training in the shops in the Yorkshire area and London, and then joined head office and eventually became the manager of various buying departments in M&S, and went on to leave M&S after 20 odd years and go into self-employment, originally as a will writer and then as a business advisor. So during the time of being a business advisor, I joined up with the FSB, and I've been a member now for 7 years. I'm able to devote more time to that because I have cut back the day-to-day work I do as a business advisor.
Fabulous. So in terms of the business advisor side, one question somebody's asked me to ask you, if you had some advice for yourself, so yep, when you first started out in business, so all those years ago, when you first went into self-employment, what would it be? What would you do differently, maybe?
What I do differently, several things. I'd certainly be a lot more thorough, and I'd be a lot keener to invoice people for the work I did rather than giving so much advice for free. In the role as a consultant to other businesses, it's very easy to give advice without charging for it. Now, luckily, some of the work I've done in that field has been under government supported programs where there were fees available to me to work as an agent to help various government agendas. So for several years, I was involved in the helping unemployed people go into self-employment through deals such as New Deal for the Self-Employed. And as a consequence of that, I did get paid for giving business advice in a small office like the ones you have in your headquarters. And that's why I got involved with the North London Enterprise Club and the North London Credit Union when I was working both as an independent consultant and then for a few years working for an organization that was called TNG and later became Avanta, which ran a national campaign of business advisors to help unemployed people become self-employed. And that was sort of a very good experience. So I got paid for that. But outside of that, and since I stopped doing that sort of government supported programs, I do give 15 minutes, which generally runs to 30 minutes, which sometimes runs to a second session of 30 minutes, to people who want to start up in business over the phone. I do this sort of introductory free offer of initial advice. So yes, I think one of the things I'd teach myself now is to charge for this advice and be less generous with free advice if I wanted to earn more money from my own business. But thankfully, to various things that have happened in my private life, I'm reasonably well off. So I don't need that money, and therefore I can now afford to volunteer even more than I did before to help small businesses, which I try and do through the FSB.
Mm. That's quite a common thing, actually. The people being expected to do things for free, or for publicity, or for for good, it's good PR. It's particularly common, I know, in the creative industries. Um, I've got friends who work in the catering business, where they're asked quite frequently by people who actually could afford to pay, to make a cake for free, or to cater an event for free, because it's good PR. I don't know, so I've gone off on a tangent here, but I'm not sure if there's anything you could sort of offer to them
Well, I think,
in words of wisdom, because I
yeah.
know it's quite.
Well, no, I think that is useful. And, the concept of social capital, of sort of becoming better known and better loved, is one that bigger businesses are now looking to expand upon, because they take those sorts of ideas much stronger. As it happened yesterday, in my role as a member of the London Apprentice Ambassadors Network, I was at a meeting where one of the big companies, who shall be nameless, but one of the massive consultancy companies, in a talk on the new ability for bigger businesses to be able to allocate 25% of their levy subscription to other businesses, smaller businesses, they were quite clear that they wanted to do this to raise their profile as a good company. And they saw a lot of benefit from being able to do various initiatives that were good PR, that would hopefully reflect well on the company. And the lady that I was talking to was particularly passionate about the role of big businesses having a social conscience, and genuinely believed in some of the schemes that they've done, like taking on unemployed youngsters and giving them free training within their organization, as a good thing to do. But the further I think one gets up the ladder of some of these organizations, the more, shall we say, profit focused they become, and they expect to get some return on the investment that can be substantial in these sort of beneficial activities, which they're honest in doing. But somebody at the end of the day, even like small businesses, have got to look at the bottom line situation, because if you as a business don't exist, you can't do good. And that is what I think a lot of people don't understand. And that's very true as well when it comes to the question of high street regeneration, really.
Yeah, so we're going to come on to talk about that. But just you mentioned apprentices there,
Yep.
and I know that this is something you're very passionate about, and that you've been involved in this area for quite some time, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell me about the sorry, I missed the name. The London
London Apprentice Ambassadors Network.
Wow, tell me about
Right.
that. What do they do?
What do they do? Well, they act as ambassadors for the concept of apprenticeships. So
Right.
they are a mixture of people, most of whom employ apprentices themselves, mainly big businesses at the moment, but they're looking to expand their sort of membership. And last year I met with the guy who runs the London one, and said that the FSB might be interested in joining, because the FSB National Advisor on Apprenticeships is also a member of the group, and he was there yesterday as well, a guy called Anthony Impney, who is on a lot of London boards to do with apprenticeships. And I think a lot of us are on that network are conscious of the need for not just big businesses to be offering apprenticeships to young people, but for small businesses to be offering it too. And there are many barriers to small businesses in taking on an apprentice. And one of the sort of themes that we're working on is how it can be made easier for larger businesses to help smaller businesses, which many of them want to do, in recruiting apprentices. And now the government have allowed big businesses to offer 25% of their levy to small businesses, so they can employ apprentices without any cost to them at all. So they can use their levy money to help employ apprentices in other businesses. And the businesses originally used to have to be part of their supply chain to enable them to transfer the money. But now the government have relaxed that, and they can transfer the money to any small business that they would like to help. But obviously, they don't want to be seen in supporting a small business that might take on an apprentice that then they might fall out with, and the apprentice leave, or the company do something that isn't right for the apprentice, and their reputation would be sullied at one remove. So they're enthusiastic about doing it, but also can see a downside to them doing it, given the way that the press often react to the way big businesses operate. But there's a genuine interest from many of the companies like IBM, Accenture, British Rail, or whatever it's called these days, and the big accountancy companies and legal firms to provide both staff and money to help small businesses employ apprentices. And, this would be a great help if we could get that right. The trouble is that there's a lot of silly talk about apprentices. I mean, for example, you often hear people say, well, if every small business were to take on one apprentice, then we could employ all the 16 to 18-year-olds that leave school. The reality is that sort of less than 3 million of the 5 million businesses that exist in the UK actually employ anybody. Out of that 5 million, 3 million of them are sole traders, literally sole traders. It's just them and possibly another family member that run the business. Really small businesses are really small, either no employees or one employee. Micro businesses, and that's what the majority of businesses are. And again, governments sort of don't always understand that in full, particularly when you look at some of the rules and regulations they have, even in the apprenticeship marketplace. I mean, you wouldn't believe how difficult it is for big businesses to allocate that 25% that they're allowed to allocate to smaller businesses because of the red tape that's involved in doing so, and the forms that have to be filled in. It is really standing in the way of doing what big businesses would like to do to help small businesses. And having had 20 years in Marks and Spencer's in my career, I understand both big businesses and small businesses.
Yeah, it's very tough. I mean, the benefits of apprenticeships, though, if you can get the right person on board, the benefits that they can bring to your business. I know that in another role I do, where with a local advice charity, and they took on 3 apprentices in a previous year, and they are fantastic. The reach that they can bring to reach young people, which is quite tricky in advice circles. They've all gone on to do really good things, but obviously that's not always the case. They do need a lot of time, supervision. Obviously, there's extra things you have to be aware of for health and safety. So I can see from that point of view as well the barriers where small businesses don't want to do it. So these sorts of schemes are incredibly important, aren't they, to bring that?
Oh, they are. They are. I mean, I've had personal experience of that through a company called Digital Youth Academy, where I was an investor and company secretary of that business. Along with my wife and various other leading people in the small business world. And I recruited an apprentice for myself and an intern and went through the process. And one of the difficulties is that, you as the employer are responsible for training the apprentice as much as the external training provider who helps get them through the particular course. And you have to employ the apprentice for a minimum of 30 hours a week, but you have to give them sort of 5 or 6 hours to do other work with the proper, the direct training provider, and give them time for the study to do the work. Now, all of that is very sort of good that small businesses can do this, but it does come with a cost. And if you're a sort of consultancy business like I was with my partner, John Silton, it costs money, because in a big business like Marks and Spencer's, you've got training that's done by sitting next to Nelly. But in your own business, you're the Nelly that the apprentice has to sit with. And if you've got a charge out rate, whether it be £30 an hour or £100 an hour, or in some cases with some of the sort of, top solicitors in relatively small law firms of £150, £200 an hour, that's the potential loss they've got if they sit down for an hour and talk to their apprentice. And even in our small business, just the two of us, we ended up having to employ part-time administrative help at, I think, something like £20 an hour to give us the time to devote to the apprentice that otherwise we would have done ourselves. So yes, you get the rewards, but usually if the apprentice stays with you for 2 or 3 years afterwards, that's when you get the return on your investment. Now, companies with 10 or more employees get a much better return on employing apprenticeships, but that's probably the subject for another discussion.
Yes, yeah, we'll move on from apprenticeships because I think we could talk about that for quite some time, and obviously that's interesting though it is. We'd like to hear more about the FSB, please. So for people who are listening who aren't familiar with that organisation, could you describe what it is that they do, and I suppose how they do it?
Right. Well, people are probably aware of things like chambers of commerce, which bring together local employers or local business owners to do things in common and put their case, particularly to local authorities, about issues such as parking and the like. Well, the Federation of Small Businesses, which is 40 years old now, does that on a slightly larger scale, in the sense that we've got over 160,000 members. And we employ 100 membership advisors to recruit new members and to ensure that existing members renew. Now, we are a member-led organization, so we have a board of directors, 12, who are all active business owners who direct the company, which has an income of something like 20 million a year and employs about 200 staff. So it's quite a big business in its own right. Now, what we do for members is give them certain benefits and arrange the negotiation of certain deals for them. And we can come back to that in a bit more detail, possibly at another time. Another aspect of what we do is organize networking events around the country, and I can tell you a little bit more about that in London if people are interested. And then we also act as a lobbying organization, and we lobby for the interests of small businesses, small and micro businesses with fewer than 250 employees. So we try and persuade governments and European governments and local authorities to do business-friendly things that will help our members, to create a framework in which they can work in a more effective way without the constraints that sometimes governments want to put on small businesses. We've campaigned, for example, for keeping the income balance on VAT to businesses that are over £80,000 in turnover. There was proposals in draft in the government that wanted to reduce that to £40,000, so that businesses that had a turnover of between 40,000 and 85,000 would suddenly be brought into the VAT world. And that VAT tax is a big burden on many small businesses, and to bring it down further, the administrative burden would have been unbearable really for many businesses. So we were able to persuade the business against that. And also in the recent Making Tax Digital proposals that have come through from the government, which are effective this month, April, we've got them to agree to do it light touch initially, but that affects about 2 million businesses, where they've got to report quarterly to the revenue what their sales and profits and everything else were. And this is the future for government involvement with businesses, to do more things electronically. But many of our members, even some of those who are VAT registered, aren't that keen on the internet, aren't that keen on modern electronics, and will find it difficult to comply with these new rules and regulations. So we try and support some of those members and get the legislation made more business friendly as far as we can. If we come to sort of premises issues like the ones of business rates, which is a big thing. You may have heard of a lot of fuss about a thing called the staircase tax, which the government tried to introduce on business rates. Well, we campaigned to have that abolished after we saw the silly results that was bringing in the real world of small businesses. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, that is interesting because that's something that always comes up when we talk about regeneration, and we have quite a lot of debates on local Facebook sites about high street regeneration and who should be doing what. And one of the things that always comes up in that context is business rates and rents, actually, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about who sets the rates, who collects the rates. A lot of people believe that councils are responsible for setting the rates. So in terms of bringing it back to sort of regeneration and what we can do in the high street, obviously there was a change recently where in the business rates and collections. How do you feel that sort of feeds into the debate that we're having about regeneration on the high street?
Well, yeah, I think you make a good point that local authorities don't have very much leeway when it comes to business rates. They are a national scheme that is through the valuation office that values every premises that's used for business purposes in the country, and then decides what the business rateable value will be of that premise, which is linked to the expected rent that business would pay. And in general terms, sort of the rates end up as the rateable values end up being around about 50% of the value of what a rent would be for the same property. Now that's fine, but when it comes to the detail of business rates, it's a different story, because it's not a particularly good way of raising money. But the figures that are raised are phenomenal. I mean, the business rates this year are set to generate something like 25 billion. Now, yes, the money is collected by local authorities, goes into a pot, and then comes back to local authorities. But local authorities administer it, and some of them administer it better than others, but they don't have much leeway. I mean, they can exempt certain premises, as they do nationally for charities, but they also have more individual powers to reduce the rates on specific businesses that are facing specific challenges. But they don't tend to want to use those powers too extensively, because it will reduce the take in business rates and ultimately the take in what they receive to do what they do as a council. And in London, we've got 10 of the, well, we've got a large number of the local authorities pay or pay over the highest number of the highest amounts in rates. So Westminster, out of that 25 billion, pays over 2 billion. The City of London itself as an area pays 1 billion. And even places like Camden pay 650 million, Tower Hamlets 460.
In terms of in terms of sort of empty properties, I guess. I mean, that's the thing that people, that's I suppose the visible sign of the decline of the high street. And one thing that people always say is, it's because business is being charged too much in rents and rates. I mean, I presume it's more complicated than that.
Yes, but I mean, now for a lot of businesses, the rents and the rates can be, after employment, after wages, the biggest costs to a business. I mean, I was in a small optician in Finchley last week, and talking to the owner, who's a member, and she was saying that the business rate she now has to pay are £24,000 a year. That's the sort of rateable value she's got. So she pays over £1,000 a month in rates and £2,000 a month in rent. and she's got that overhead of £3,000 a month before she starts making any profit. And in a small opticians that doesn't turn over a massive amount, that's a lot of money to earn before you've got, you know, your wages to pay. And she employs up to 7 people, mainly on a part-time basis, including herself, to run the opticians. It is a big lump of her, a big percentage of her revenue is spent on rent and rates. And there's very little she can do about it. And to do things about it is very complicated. She's not entitled to, given the rateable value of her business, to exemption, which you can get if your rateable value is less than £12,000. But even for smaller businesses, you've got to apply for that £12,000 back, even though you're entitled to it. And a lot of local authorities and a lot of small business owners don't know they're entitled to that exemption, and it's not always claimed. And it's difficult to find out how many of them don't claim it, and therefore how much of it is paid, if you like, in error. And we're trying to educate our members so that they know about this and how they might claim. And it's very difficult to get the valuation office to agree in lower business rates for your property because of the amount of evidence that you have to supply. So it really is a big challenge to get on top of business rates for small businesses.
Do you think there are other challenges that are, I guess, in terms of the high street and regenerating the high street, do you feel that that is, that I suppose reworking the business rate regime would remove one of the major barriers to regeneration, or because obviously there's been a lot of discussion about how people's shopping habits have changed, and if people don't go into those shops, then if they buy everything online, then obviously, you know, your optician, to use that example, can't compete with that, or can they? I mean,
well, they can and they can't. I mean, there are already companies that will send you spectacles through the post, having ordered them online, and they've done very well. And I shan't mention the specific name of the company, but more and more now, it is the trends in shopping that are causing difficulties for high streets, and particularly high streets in London and places like Enfield, Barnet, you know, where we live and work and spend a lot of our time. One of the factors there that is often not taken into account relates to the number of people now in work. Now, for a long time, there was a big difference in the percentage of people of working age that worked, and that big difference was by gender. So many more men of working age worked, but fewer women of working age worked. Now, the overall figure is something like 75% of people of working age work. A lot more women now are working. And of course, depending on where you work, you may or may not be in a high street. And one of the factors that is affecting high streets is the greater number of people who are at work, who may not
shopping,
and not shopping, absolutely, and not shopping. And this is one of the reasons why retailers are in difficulty, is they haven't got enough custom, and reducing the cost may not be enough to allow high streets to preserve. And the message, I suppose, to the public is, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And I think it, whilst there are certain things that can be done to help high streets, looking forward, high streets are going to be very different in the next 10 to 20 years, and will be very different from what they are today. Because, I mean, again, I have investments in online retailers, and I can see the progress that one or two of them are making, and that's taking away business from the high street. And that trend is likely to continue. I mean, I've got a sort of 40-year-old stepdaughter and a 37-year-old daughter, and both of them work, for example, and they are ordering more and more online. The expansion of home deliveries and groceries by Tesco and Ocado and Waitrose and, Marks and Spencer's now, is taking people away from the high street. The closure of bank branches is taking people away from the high street. Footfall is going down. And although people will still shop, not swap, well, they swap as well, but shop, the shopping hours are also longer, which is a good thing for retailers on the one hand, because some of those people who work, let's say 9 to 5, can now shop possibly on a Saturday or a Sunday, which are big days for many high street retailers now, and in the evenings. But that incurs additional costs to the retailer. It's much easier if you can take £100,000 a week in 40 hours a week rather than 68 hours a week or 70 hours a week, which many of them are now open. But it's, again, you know, looking at my daughters, they order their food online, they order stuff from Boots online, they order stuff from Marks and Spencer's online, and they don't go shopping to high streets in the same way that I certainly did when I was a young person with kids.
So what then? What can we do? I mean, should we be trying to do anything about that? I mean, or should we be looking at high streets in a different way?
I think we should be looking at high streets in a different way. I mean, whilst the FSB have got lots of proposals as to how things might be improved and how the damage can be reduced, and the principal way is a complete change on business rates, and I would abolish business rates as they are now and abolish them altogether and not have business rates as a tax, because to me it's a bad tax, and I would recover the money. This is not FSB policy, but it's my policy. I would recover the money by a sales tax, and that sort of benefits and disadvantages different companies and different people. But it's a lot easier to collect a sales tax as long as businesses are honest, and as long as there's sufficient monitoring of those who need to pay. But that's another factor. But on the future of the high streets, I think we're trying to push water uphill to expect retailers to continue to survive and thrive. We've now got too many shops in the country and too many shops in London, and that's why there are empty shops, because the high street can no longer support the business values that need to be created for the shops to remain open and make a profit. We've got too many shops.
So we're looking probably more at sort of experiences kind of thing,
yes,
rather than
smaller commercial centres in communities. There's a lot of activity that takes place now at night time. We've got to come to a new relationship between nighttime economies, domestic housing, and shopping centres, or centres for nighttime activity.
Oh, we are out of time. Which,
oh my God!
Never
got on to the real stuff.
we talked about apprentices, which was very interesting in itself. I mean, if you would like, I suppose, if you have a plea on behalf of small businesses, your clients of the FSB and consultancy and investment wise, what would it be if you could sort of say one thing to listeners?
Right. Well, what I think, small businesses in commercial high streets deliver more than just a shopping service. They are part of the community, and if we allow that to disappear, we're going to disadvantage older people who haven't got cars, people who haven't got access to understand the internet. We're going to get different communities. And I think there's a lot of good to be had from maintaining a community of commercial activity along with social activity and the ability to buy, sell, and have services. And I think if we don't want our lifestyles to change too much, and we want what a lot of us have been used to and the benefits of the high street, and a lot of small businesses are much keener to employ people with disabilities. They're much keener to employ older people. They're much keener to employ less well-educated people, because they see a social role to what they do. Whereas whilst companies like Marks and Spencer's will do that to some degree, not to the same degree as thousands of independent shop owners will do, and thousands of independent service people will do. But the high streets are going to change, and we may well end up with high streets that are to do with personal services, where you've got to go to have your hair cut or you've got to go to have a meal out. But when you look at these modern centres that have cinemas on them, there's plenty of places to have your meals there. You know, we are in danger of losing the high streets, and we're fighting what is a losing battle because people are buying online more, and I can't see that being able to be changed. And, you know, streets are crowded and parking's expensive and crowds not always liked. And there's all sorts of things putting people off that can be adjusted. But fundamentally, there is a trend now to buy online. And I don't think you're going to crush that. I don't think you're going to crush that at all, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're sort of looking at using high streets differently, I think is what we're saying, rather than trying to cling on to what we've had before, which with, you know, socioeconomic terms, demographic terms, just doesn't work anymore. But do, if anybody gets a chance, do have a look at the FSB website, because they've got a lot of really interesting research on there about all sorts of topics, from sort of the business rate stuff, women in entrepreneurship, the B word that we're all talking about now. They don't have a view whether it's good or bad, but they've got research about the possible effects. Right. And obviously, you, Albert, you are on the group, aren't you? On the Enfield Voices group, so people can continue this debate on there. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you too, Julia. Bye bye.
Bye bye.